Welcome to Crypto West Coast, where we discuss everything crypto from a Canadian perspective. My name's Damien, and today I'm going to share with you how I record my digital asset purchases, trades, and sales using my go-to spreadsheets. I recently made a video identifying when a cryptocurrency tax event takes place, and you can find it down here in the description, along with all of the references to this video, as well as my Canadian cryptocurrency tracking spreadsheet identifying some of the cryptocurrency platforms I use, their pros and cons, referral links that you can use if you want to sign up. Also down below are my timestamps, and you can jump ahead to parts of this video. So let's get started. First of all, let's identify what is and is not a taxable event. There are no taxes for just buying and holding cryptocurrency, and there are no taxes when you're moving cryptocurrencies from one wallet or address to another. However, there is a taxable event when you convert one type of cryptocurrency to fiat, such as the Canadian dollars, when you dispose of in a trade one type of cryptocurrency to acquire another cryptocurrency, such as trading Ethereum for Bitcoin, when you dispose of by selling or by gifting cryptocurrency, when you use one type of cryptocurrency to purchase a good or service, trading or selling to a stable coin is tradable and thus taxable. Mining cryptocurrency is a gain when disposing of the crypto. The cost basis would be zero in this case, as no money was spent acquiring it. Thus, the entire sales proceeds is considered a gain, and according to the Canadian government, 50% of that gain is taxable income. And finally, hard forks and staking would be considered the same as mining. One final thing to be aware of is what's called superficial loss or wash sale rule. This rule applies if you are trying to claim a loss, and it states a loss cannot be claimed if the sold or traded asset was purchased 30 days before and 31 days after the sale or trade, for a total of 61 days. This applies to you or a person affiliated with you in terms of taxation. In this case, the capital loss is disallowed and reported as zero, and the loss amount is added back onto the adjusted cost base. Now, I'm sure this rule applies more when we're talking tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars and not $10 or $100, but something to be aware of. You cannot take a loss if you sold or traded an asset in a 61-day window. Keeping accurate records of cryptocurrency purchases, trades, and sales are important. The CRA is clear that you need to keep accurate records of all your cryptocurrency dealings. Whether you use crypto tax software or you do it yourself on paper or spreadsheets, you are expected to keep records of your transactions. Exchanges will have a record of all your transactions, but most will not keep a proper recording for tax purposes. If using multiple exchanges, it would not be possible for the exchanges to keep accurate tax records. Some important things need to be recorded for tax purposes. If you will be using a crypto tax software, you need to send files generated by the exchanges and wallets you use to the provider of the tax software. If doing your own recordings, you will need to provide the following: the transaction date, the action, the number of units involved, the price of the units, and I also record in US dollars since many of my trades are done on international exchanges such as Binance, the fees, the average cost base, which we will talk about, and any gains and losses acquired when you make such exchanges. In my researching of tracking cryptocurrencies for tax purposes, I discovered a very useful and free website called Adjusted Cost Base.ca. The link is below. It goes through the process of calculating the adjusted cost base and capital gains, which is necessary for tax purposes. It goes through several examples of calculations, which I have pulled out and will go through separately in some slides. A very basic example is as follows. If you were to buy 100 shares at $50 per share, that would be $5,000. If you went to then sell those 100 shares at the price of $120 per share, that would equal $12,000. And so the gain on this whole interaction would be the sale proceeds minus the original cost, which equals $7,000. This was a simple example and an easy way to calculate the capital gains. But what happens when we have more than one purchase and sale taking place? We need to go back to our Adjusted Cost Base.ca for some guidance. Things become more complex when there's a series of multiple buy and sell transactions at various price levels. In this case, you might ask yourself, when a sale transaction occurs where only a portion of shares are sold, what should I use as the cost when calculating the capital gain? Should I use the cost of the first shares purchased, the most recent shares purchased? The answer is that the CRA requires you to keep a running total of the adjusted cost base for tax purposes. After I discovered this information, I had to go back to my spreadsheets and make changes to my adjusted cost base to fall more in line with what is expected by the CRA. Back to adjustedcostbase.ca, when you buy shares, the total ACB is recalculated to be the previous total ACB plus the total cost of the new shares plus any transaction costs. And they go through a number of example calculations here, which I will show you in my slides. So mathematically, a new total ACB after a buy transaction would equal the previous total ACB plus the share price times the number of shares purchased plus the transaction costs. When a sale transaction occurs, the new total ACB must be reduced from the previous base on the portion of shares that are sold. So the equation here is the new total ACB after a sell transaction is equal to the previous total ACB minus the ACB per share times the number of shares sold. Now these are just mathematical equations. We can plug these into a spreadsheet. The only thing we need to be aware of is when we buy, we're adding numbers to each other, and when we are selling, we are subtracting some numbers. So going back to the example from the averagecostbase.ca, the first transaction was on March 3rd. It was a buy. The shares were bought, 100 of them. The price was $50. There was a commission or maybe a transaction fee of $10, and the balance of shares is $100. So if we take this equation, the new total ACB equals the previous total ACB. Since this is the first transaction, there's a 0 plus the share price, which was $50, times the number of shares purchased, which was 100, plus a transaction cost, and the math goes through and it equals $5,010. The second example took place on May 1st, and it was a sale. They sold 50 of those shares, so not all of them. The price was $120 per share, so they're going to make a gain. Again, there was a commission or a transaction fee, and it keeps track of the balance. 100 minus 50 is 50. And so because we're doing a sale, we're using minus signs. So the new total ACB equals the previous total ACB. So this was the previous total ACB, so that gets plugged in there. There's a minus multiplication sign. And if you were doing this on a spreadsheet, you would need to put things in brackets so the operations take place in the correct order. We multiplied the previous number of shares, so the previous number was 100 shares. We minus the number of shares sold, which was 50. We divide by the number of previous shares, which was 100, and we get a number of $2,505. Because this was a sale, and from the sale a gain was made, we need to calculate the capital gain. So the equation for doing such things looks as follows. There's a capital gain or loss is equal to the share price multiplied by the number of shares sold, and those are in a bracket, so that's a calculation, minus any transaction costs, minus, and now we have some brackets again because these calculations go together, the total ACB divided by the previous number of shares multiplied by the number of shares sold. So if in our example, the share price was $120 multiplied by the 50 shares that were sold minus the commission fee minus the total ACB, which in the previous example was $5,010, divided by the previous number of shares, which previously we had 100 shares, multiplied by the number of shares sold, which is 50, and we come up to a total of $3,485. So that was the gain. So now we've calculated the capital gain from transaction number 2, as well as we have a new total ACB for transaction number 2. And so now we move into transaction number 3. So it says on July 18th, they bought 50 shares at $130 per share. The commission fee was $10. And again, we're back to 100 shares. So a new total ACB will need to be calculated. And because it was a buy, we're going to be using plus signs. So as stated before, the new total ACB is the previous total ACB plus the share price multiplied by the number of shares purchased plus any transaction costs. And if we drop our numbers in correctly, the previous total ACB was $2,505 plus the $130 per share we just purchased, bought 50 shares, added a transaction cost, and now the new total ACB is $9,015. So going back to the example, we are on the fourth step, which is a sale. So on September 25th, so the new total ACB will equal the previous total ACB right there, 9,015, multiplied by the previous number of shares, and previously it was 100 shares, minus the number of shares sold, they sold 40, divided by the previous number of shares, which was 100, and it comes out to $5,409. So that's the new total ACB that we need to keep track of. And because this was a sale, we need to do the capital gains or loss, and in this case, there's going to be a loss. And the calculation doesn't change from what we just saw. The share price, which was $90, multiplied by the number of shares sold, which were 40 of them, minus transaction costs, and in this case, they keep having a $10 transaction cost, minus the total ACB, and the total ACB was $9,015, divided by the previous number of shares, which was 100, multiplied by the number of shares sold, which was 40, and in this case it comes out to a negative $16, so therefore a loss took place in this transaction. So going back to Adjusted Cost Base.ca, a summary of the calculations that we just looked at are here in this table. This time they've included the column of the ACB per share, and any capital gains or losses that happened in these transactions. And right here, if you go to the website, adjustedcostbase.ca, it is a web application that performs all the necessary calculations for you. All you need to do is enter the details of each transaction. Although it's important to understand the concepts when calculating ACB, adjustedcostbase.ca makes things less tedious and reduces the risk of human calculation error. And it says, here are the results after entering the transactions from the example into adjustedcostbase.ca, and it comes up looking like something you might have on your own spreadsheet. Now you can go to Adjusted Cost Base and you can sign up for an account and begin to enter transactions. Here's an example of some transactions I've entered recently from PancakeSwap and my cake tokens, and it just keeps track of my buys, sells, and my new ACB, my change in my ACB, any gains or losses that I may have made. There are plenty of software and applications out there that you can sign up for. Many are free, such as Coinly and CoinPanda, and many, many more. A simple Google search will help you find some application that you could use. Many, if not all, of these are free to start, especially if you only have a few transactions. But as your transactions increase, there will be a fee associated with them. And that's probably why, since I started with a spreadsheet, I've continued to do so far. Now that we've identified what calculations need to be made, how to make those calculations, I've shown you a free source to use, such as adjustedcostbase.ca, to record your transactions. I now want to show you how I use Google Sheets to record all of my transactions. If you have a Google account, you can access Google Sheets. Google Sheets is just like Microsoft Excel, except done by Google, and maybe doesn't have all the features that Excel would have. But you would click on these 9 buttons here, scroll down, and here's Google Sheets. Takes you to this screen, and you could create your own blank Google Sheets. And if you had any other ones, they'd be listed here. The one we're going to use right now, take a look at, is this one I prepared for this video. I made this template to share in this video, but I also have access to it in the description down below. And you can copy and paste this into your own Google Sheets format. So just to let you know what we have here, we have a column for the date, the action, the units that we purchase, the price in Canadian dollars. I also record things in US dollars. And since I do US dollars, I have the US Canadian exchange rate, any fees that we paid to make the transaction. And this is where our calculations will take place. If we had any gains or losses, they would take place here. The exchange that we made these purchases or sales or trades. And then the cost of the trade, both in Canadian dollars and US dollars. Just a few things to note. I've color coordinated it just so that each column stands out a little bit different. And for the Canadian US exchange rate, what I use is I just go to a Google, I type in Canadian dollar versus US dollar, and this gives me the exchange rate. So I punch that in every time I make a calculation. I do not know how much knowledge you have using Google Sheets or Excel, so I'm going to point some things out. If you already know all the things about Sheets, you can move on using the timestamps down below. But if I just want to move my column width, I just get my cursor here and I can hold it down and I can move it in and move it out. If I want to total this column, I use the tools right here, sum, and then it's highlighted up here. So I just have to hold my mouse down and drag, and I want to add up everything in that column, let go, hit enter, and it'll sum it for me. And of course, it's the same as what I already had there a moment ago. If I wanted to find the average price that I've been paying, I could go to this button, click average, highlight, holding my mouse button down and drag, let go, push enter, and that was the average price of that column. You may notice on the screen there's different colors, text and things like that. So this is my text color button. So if I want to change the color of the text, I can use that button. If I want to change, this is the background color, so I can click on that. If I want to draw lines on my Excel document, I click this, and I have choices of where I want the lines to go, how the color, how thick I want my lines to be, etc. This is how I want to align things, center it, or to the left or right. If I want to add more columns, I want more room here, I could click on that and left click my mouse, and I can insert one above, and I just added another row. Same thing I can do over here. I can insert one to the left or right. If I'm not happy with what I did, I can undo right there. Text size, the type of text, font. If I want more decimal points, I use these 2 buttons. I can make the decimal move, add more zeros, and bring it back. If I want $sign, I can do that. I don't want that, undo. If you're unsure of how to do something, Google's your friend. For example, you notice if I move my cursor around, my A-B column doesn't move and my 1, 2 doesn't move. Now what's happening here is they're frozen. So if you don't know how to do something, you could go to Google and type Google Sheets, freeze columns, and the instructions come up. On your computer, open the spreadsheet in Google Sheets, select a row or column you want to freeze or unfreeze. At the top, click View, there's a freeze button, and then select how many rows or columns you want to freeze. I'll show you what's happening. So we click the view, and we go on freeze. We want to freeze two rows, and that's what's happened. I've frozen 2 rows, and I can do the same thing. If I want to freeze columns, go to View, freeze 2 columns is what I've done here, and that's what's frozen. So I always see, no matter where I move on the screen, I always see my headings, which are important to me, and the dates and things like that. So looking at my spreadsheet, I have columns for everything that the CRA is looking for when it comes to tax time. Quick review, I need a transaction date, I need the action, I need the number of units, I need the price, any fees, I have to calculate my average cost base, and record any gains or losses. Now what I've done is I've done 3 calculations based on an initial purchase, then a sale, because we would have to calculate a gain or a loss, and then a consecutive purchase once we've done that. And a reminder that I have a copy of this down below in the description, and you can make a copy and paste it into your own Google Sheets and work from there. So let's take a look at what's happening here. Let's say I made a purchase on May 17th. I bought Bitcoin. The price was $54,000 Canadian. And right here, this, I don't have to do anything. If I know what my Canadian US dollar conversion rate is, this is just a calculation. It says it's equal to D3 times F3. Well, what's in D3? That's the Canadian dollars multiplied by F3, and that's what we get. In fact, anytime you want to do a calculation, you always start with equals, and you can do anything. You want to add up that row, hit the plus sign, plus that row, hit enter. It does a calculation for you. Moving on, I've entered my fees if I had any, and these columns here are where calculations start to take place. I have equal signs in all of them. Down here, I've explained what's happening above. This is our first purchase. So when we get a new total ACB, it's equal to the previous total ACB plus the share price times the number of shares purchased, and then we add it all up to any transaction costs. So the new total ACB is equal to 0 plus bracket bracket, whatever's in D3 multiplied by C3, we close the bracket, plus whatever's in G3 and close the bracket. And that's what we have up here. If we look right here in the view, it's exactly the same thing. 0 plus bracket bracket, D3 times C3, close the bracket, plus G3, close bracket. So what are we doing? 0 was no previous ACB, plus D3, so here's column D, D3, the $54,000, times C3, that's how many units we bought, and then we add all up to G3, which was the fees, and we get a new ACB of $21,304. Also in this column, I have, like, how much did I spend? So I took whatever was in C3 and multiply it by D3. And C3 was the units, D3 was how much I paid per unit, and it just tells us I would have spent $21,000 Canadian. And the conversion here, we just use the US dollar conversion, N3, there's the number N3, times F3, which is the exchange rate at the time, and we get a US dollar value. And down here, we're just doing a sum. So we use the sum function to get this number here. Next, I want to demonstrate a sale, because in a sale, we are going to have to do a calculation for a gain. So down here, I have the calculation for when a sale takes place. And we take the new total ACB, which equals to the previous total ACB, multiplied by the previous number of shares, minus, remember when we do sales, we do minuses, the number of shares sold, divided by the previous number of shares. And to summarize it, the new total ACB is equal to whatever's in J3, multiplied by the H3 plus C4, those were in brackets, divided by whatever's in C3, and we close the brackets up so they all balance out. And it says here, note, I am using plus signs because I am recording negative units when selling or trading. When I showed you the previous examples, this would have been a minus sign in my slides, but when I record a sale, I record it as a negative so that I can add up this column. In my slides, they were asking us not to put a minus sign here, just call it a sale. But in order for my calculations to work the way I want them to, I put a minus sign there because C4 becomes a negative number, as you can see here. So it already has a negative. So if that was a negative, we'd have two negatives, and that equals a positive in math. So in the new ACB column, we see my calculation, J3 times bracket bracket H3 plus C4 close bracket divided by C3 close bracket. And it's the exact same thing down here, J3 times H3 plus C4 divided by C3. We get a calculation, a new ACB. The change in ACB is just doing a simple math, whatever's in J4, which is right there, minus J3, and it becomes a negative number. The ACB per unit is just a division whatever's in J4, which is the 10,000, divided by whatever's in H4, how many units there are total we have now. And this column is just a simple math. Takes whatever was in H3, which was the previous number of units, plus whatever happened over here in the C column. And this is why our unit balance dropped, because we sold 0.2 units. Next, we need to calculate a gain because a sale took place. And so the calculation I have here matches what I wrote down here in gains as a sample calculation. So whenever we calculate a gain or a loss, we take the share price multiplied by the number of shares sold minus any transaction costs minus, and then another set of calculations, total ACB divided by previous number of shares multiplied number of shares sold. And we just make sure the brackets are all balanced and in the right places. Summarized here, which equals, so it's got triple brackets, D4 times a negative C4 minus G4, the double brackets, minus, and then another group of calculations, double brackets, J3 divided by H3, multiplied by a negative C4, and close the brackets. And my note says I'm using minus signs, the negative C4, because I'm recording negative units when selling or trading. And it just goes back the same reason I'm putting negative here so that my column adds up correctly, whereas in the slides, they would not have had a negative in front of these calculations. So if the math goes through, in this particular example, selling 0.2 Bitcoins at $65,000 Canadian, the gain would have been 2,129, and that would have to be recorded in taxes. Remember, 50% of that is taxable. And if you want to do the calculation, you could always add a column or something, and you could say equals that divided by 2, so $1,064.76 is taxable. And finally, I have a third example, which is another purchase, because the ACB will need to change again. And here's the example I have down here for any other purchase, which is a new total ACB is equal to the previous total ACB plus the share price multiplied by the number of shares purchased and add on any transaction costs. Here's the simplified equation. New total ACB is equal to J3 plus, in brackets, D4 multiplied by C4, close brackets, add in any fees. And if we go up here to the new ACB, we can look up here that the equation is J4 plus D5 times C5 plus the G5. And I just want to show you, why is this J4 and that's J3? It all depends what column we're looking at. So it just means the previous total ACB. So in this example, I had J3 here, but over here, we're in column 5. So the previous ACB needs to be the one above it, which is J4. So that's why it says J4. I'm just trying to show you that all these are in the column we're working on, and this calculation is from the column before it, the previous line number. So if we do our math right, after we purchased 0.005 Bitcoin at a price of $42,423, the math calculated for us the US dollar. There was a fee, and all my calculations have created a new ACB, which is what CRA needs us to record. And just keeping all my calculations the same, this purchase, we see it was only $212. This column adds up, this column adds up. So you have an idea of what you are purchasing, what you're spending, and things like that. Just want to point this out, gains and loss. This figure, it doesn't have a dollar sign yet, so I just click on it, go over here, click on it, and it just fixes it up to how it should look for currency. Just pointing out why I have this. If we're going from Canadian dollars to US dollars, our calculation should have a multiplication. If we're going from US dollars to Canadian dollars, we should use a division. So what do I mean by that? Right here, this is D3 multiplied by F3. The Canadian dollars multiplied by the exchange rate. So we're going from Canadian dollars to US dollars, we multiply. Sometimes when I do things and I'm on Binance, for example, I'm working in US dollars. So I would be filling in this column. Let's say something happened for $70,000 and I wanted to figure out Canadian dollars. So I would go equals, I'm going from US dollars to Canadian, so I'm going to divide. So I'm going to take that, divide it by, let's say the exchange rate was 83 cents, and that's my conversion. So right now I know, because the Canadian dollar is worth less than the US dollar, when I go from US dollars to Canadian dollars, my answer should get larger. And when I go from Canadian dollars to US dollars, it should get smaller. Down here, I just want to point this out. This is what I sometimes use as an exit strategy. And I got this idea from Rob at Digital Asset News. Now, what this is an exit strategy where I am going to sell in 20% increments 80% of my coins. And why 80%, not 100? Well, if I sell in 20% increments and I sell 80% of it, if my coin goes on to some moonbeam run, I'll still have 20% of my coins to sell and gain my profits from there. So just an idea. So in this chart, I take my current units. I manually enter this. I just go up here, whatever my current total of coins are, I enter it right there. Here's the exchange rate if you wish to use it. That I manually enter that. And here I just say that 80% of my Bitcoin is equal to that number. Now that's a calculation. It takes whatever's in D28. So here's column D28, the number of coins I have, and just multiplies it by 0.8, which is 80%. So 80% of this total number of coins is 0.1576. And that's going to be used in my calculations in my chart down here. Now, I have a selling point and an actual selling point column. And here's why. Sometimes if I want to sell my coins, I'm just through these numbers here. They don't mean anything. Let's say I want to sell at $100,000. Maybe millions of people have a sell point at that price. So the advice is to set a sell price, an actual sell price, just slightly below that. And then percent, I just have my column, I'm selling in 20%. I don't have to sell in 20%. I could sell in 10%, 15%, 50%, doesn't matter. I manually enter these numbers here. Now here's the amount sold. Now here's a calculation. It takes whatever's in H28 and multiplies it by C31. So H28 is the number of coins, my 80% of my coins, multiplied by whatever's in C31. And C31 is my 20%. So this is 20% of that. And here's my profits column. If I sell this number of coins at the sell point of 99,985, that will be my profits. It's just a calculation. It takes what's in D31, the number of coins, multiplied by what's in B31, which is the price that I'm selling at, and that's just my profits. And so I can manipulate these numbers. And actually, I notice I don't even have dollar signs here, so I can change that, highlight those, click on the dollar sign. There we go. And I'm just calculating. This is just a calculation. See, it says the sum of what's from D31 to D35. That's these. And you notice that number matches that number. So I know I did my calculations right. And this is just a sum of the columns. And just an example. I just threw that there for you to see. You can do with it what you want. Just something to think about. If you're new to Google Sheets, that's a lot. And you need to take time to practice. You can copy and paste my sample grid onto yours and play around with it. If you delete a column, that may change the calculations that are already in there. So just be careful with that. The last thing I want to do is prove to you that my calculations are correct. And you can do this too, because I'm going to go to Adjusted Cost Base.ca. Again, you can create your own account here, and you can use just this, or you can use this as I do to check my calculations. So what I've done is I've created a demo Bitcoin form to do this with. So I'm going to click on a new transaction, and we did a buy. On the date that we used, it was May 17th, 2021. The price was $54,345. I already have it pre-entered. Now it's not the total. I have to click on this box. That's the price per Bitcoin, so per share. How many shares did we buy? We bought 0.392 shares. I already have it pre-entered. The commission was 82 cents, so I have it pre-entered. And I click on add transaction. And here it tells me all the information I need for tax purposes. Let's compare that to our chart. So looking at the chart I just entered and my own chart, let's compare. We have the date matches, of course. We had a buy, I call it a purchase. The amount that we spent was $21,303. In mine, my my calculation comes over here, 21,303. Number of shares, 0.392. Here's our unit balance, 0.392. The amount per share was $54,345, and that's what we entered. The commission was 82 cents. Whoops, my mistake. I entered 85. We can edit that. Change it to 85. Save change. So now I fixed it. There's our 85-cent commission, our fees. Share balance, 0.392. New ACB, 21,304. 21,304. This is the important one. I've done my calculation correct on my spreadsheet based on what Adjusted Cost Base.ca is telling me. My new ACB per share price is 54,347, and there it is there. So I've done my calculations correct. Let's move on to our sell. New transaction. I had my sale on the same day. It's now a sell. The date was May 17th, 2021. The price was 65,000. Again, that's not total. That's the price per Bitcoin per share. The number that we sold was 0.2, and the commission I typed in was 90 cents, and I add the transaction. And if we compare, we're looking at top, we had a sale. The amount was 13,000, and it matches my 13,000. Now notice I have minus signs because I'm subtracting it from what I put in. So my calculations just come up minus. We sold 0.2, price was 65,000, commission was 90 cents. Now there was a gain. Let's see if we did our calculation. $2,129.51. And my calculation exactly matches. And the new ACB, which is important, is 54,347. It matches. So I know that what I've done is correct. We'll do the final purchase. New transaction. It was a buy. The date was May 30th. The price was 42,423, not total, per share. The number we purchased was 0.005. The fees were 50 cents. And we add the transaction. And let's compare the chart. So always the new transactions on their chart come at the top. So there was our buy on May 30th. We spent $212.12. And it matches my calculation I did over here. We bought 0.005 of a Bitcoin. That matches what I entered here. The price was 42,423. That's what we entered there. Commission was 50 cents, so the fee was 50 cents. And then here's all the calculations we need to make sure. And the new ACB is $10,647. The change in ACB is $212. Now we're off by a tiny fraction here. I'm not going to worry about a penny. And I know that what I've been doing so far is correct. So once you have this started, you can just copy and paste formulas. For example, let's say you made a purchase on June 1 and you bought half a Bitcoin. Good for you. And the price was at discount at $36,000. And the exchange rate, let's say, was 82 cents. And the fee was $1. And I notice I don't have dollar signs here. We can fix that, highlight them. After this, I can just copy and paste. I can take whatever formula was in that box, highlight it, left mouse click, I get this screen, I copy it, and I just want to paste it there, and that pastes the formula for this line. See, it says D6 times F6. So D6 was the price of the Bitcoin multiplied by F6, the exchange rate, and it did a calculation for me in that line. Same for all this information over here. I can highlight this whole column, left mouse click, copy, and paste the whole line. And it does the calculations for me for this line. The same thing could happen for a sale. Let's say on June 3rd, you made a sale and you sold half of what you just bought a few days before, so 0.25 of a Bitcoin, because the price ballooned up to $65,000. The exchange rate stayed the same. The fee was 99 cents. So from here, we can copy and paste. We can take whatever's in this line, copy it, and paste it. Then for this line, we need to use the sale. So we have to go to what we did in the sale line. So we highlight the calculations in this column, left mouse click, copy, and we go down to this column and paste. And it does the work for us. But you might have noticed a problem. I have a negative gain, but here's why. when I sold, I didn't put a minus sign in front of this number. So I need to put a minus. And if I enter that, my gains for this sale were $5,973.39, and half of that is required for me to claim on my income tax. Again, you do not pay taxes on the $8,102. You record taxes on half of that. And you could do a simple calculation. Again, equals this column divided by 2. So you would be responsible to record $4,051.45 on your income tax forms. The final thing I want to show you is, let's say you've done this chart and this is Bitcoin, but you have another coin. First of all, let's rename this. Let's call this Bitcoin, BTC. If you want to add another coin, we go here to the plus sign, and let's say it's Ethereum. Let's rename it. It's a blank document. So if we go to Bitcoin, we highlight everything. Column O to line 40, and left click, copy, go here, column O, all the way down to 40, left click, paste. Here we have everything. Now you would change that to Ethereum. And you may not want to delete everything here, but you could start recording your first purchase. Maybe you bought 0.5 of an ETH and the price was $2,000, and everything starts to change. The fee was 23 cents. Everything changes, but you don't have to do anything. Let's say you didn't sell anything, you did another purchase. Well, you click on that line, so the whole line's highlighted. You left click, you insert one above, and maybe you want to do another purchase. May 18, you bought another 0.5 of an ETH, and the price went down. That's why you bought it, 1,500. And the exchange rate was the same as the day before, and the fee was 20 cents. Now, we can't copy this line because this line has a 0 in it, but we can copy this line down here. That was a purchase. So if we highlight all these and left click, we can put it up here. Paste, and it's done all the work for us. However, we might have a problem here. Let's take a look at this cell column. We have a problem. It's telling us we need to go J3, H3, C5, C3. There's something wrong here. We got a 3, 3, 5. Always our calculations, they need to be one column or the other. So what this is doing is it's taking a look all the way up at J3, but it's not J3 we want, it's J4. So we have the wrong column. Anywhere where it says J3, we're in the wrong column. We need to change all the J3s to a J4. So that becomes J4, and this C3 becomes C4. It's the column above. Do we have any other problems with our formulas? H3, C5. Well, we need to go H4. How about J5 minus J3? It needs to be J5 minus J4. We fix that one. This column is fine. So something to be aware of when you insert rows above or below, your formulas sometimes get messed up and you have to go back and fix them. So as I end this video, my intention was to inform you what is expected from the CRA's point of view in regards to our transactions. I tried to show you all the formulas on how to calculate the transactions. I showed you how I use Google Sheets to do my own transactions, and how I use Adjusted Cost Base.ca to verify that my calculations are correct. This all may seem tedious, but for me, it's the system I've started with, and I keep going with it. And I have a good feel of where I am in all of my purchases. I know how much money I've spent, how much money I've gained, and the total number of coins I have at any moment in time. I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you got any value from it, please give me a thumbs up, and I hope to see you in the next one.